pasta. I've got little snowflakes for noodles, and then some pumpkin scones with a brown sugar glaze. So over our pasta, we'll do noodles and a creamy sauce, and then we're going to make this chicken in a tomato and spinach kind of little ragu that we can put over the top. So let's start by making out our scones. These are going to be a sourdough discard scone. We'll start with our dry mix, and then we'll cut our butter into it, and then we'll make our wet thing. So we're going to start off with 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. So we need a bit more flour in this recipe than I do in my typical scones because we have that pumpkin puree that's going into it, which has a little bit more of a liquid base. So 1.5 cups of flour. There we go. And we can pop that over here. And then we're going to do 1/2 cup of brown sugar. I'll pack it in firmly. And then we're going to do 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And then 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. So there's 1/2. And then we're going to do 2 full ones, 1 and 2. And now we're going to get to our spices. We're going to do a tablespoon of cinnamon. Because we want these to have nice warm flavor to them. And we're using up the rest of our pumpkin that we had from the earlier in the week when we made our pumpkin coffee cake. So a tablespoon of pumpkin or of cinnamon. And then we're going to use 1/2 teaspoon of ground cloves. And 1/2 teaspoon of allspice. And then we're going to give this a nice little mix with my pastry cutter. And then we will cut in 1/2 cup of cold butter. But first, this is kind of my pastry cutter. We're going to mix this around until all of that's kind of evenly distributed so that we can cut our butter into it nicely. There we go. It has a nice kind of light brown color. That's just from the brown sugar and the spices. There we go. And now, I'll put my butter over here. We're going to cut in. You want to make sure you use a cold stick of butter because that's going to give you the flaky layers to your scone because we're going to do our press and fold method, which gives us so many delicious flaky layers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of cut down like this first, and we're going to kind of cut into cubes. This way, it just makes it easier when I go through with my pastry knife that I don't have super huge chunks to work with, but smaller ones, because essentially you want to cut this butter into pieces smaller than a pea so that you have just little bits of chunks of butter in there that will form our really flaky, delicious kind of crust or our layers in our scone. And then I'm just going to lightly dust them with our sugar mixture. That way they don't stick quite as much to our blade. And then we're going in with our pastry cutter, which is just a series of blades here. And you're going to just kind of cut through the butter into that flour and sugar mixture. Now, if you don't have a pastry knife like this, you can always use 2 knives, or you could use a food processor, or you can even go like the old school way where you kind of press the butter between your fingers and kind of smush it into the flour. So lots of different methods to get to the same end goal. I kind of like this because I'm only making a small batch of scones. So I'm making 16 mini scones, which you could also make 8 bigger ones. But this is just kind of the easiest to clean up. You don't have to lug out your food processor, which is a lot of cleaning up, There's a lot of different parts to it. And I just, every so often, I'll take my little butter knife there, clear out my blades, because sometimes those chunks of butter love to get stuck in there. And we're just going to chop it up until we have that butter cut into the flour mixture. And then in our separate bowl, we're going to make our wet mixture using our egg, cream, sourdough discard, and pumpkin puree. And we'll mix that together, and then we'll gently kind of stir it into this mixture, and then we'll dump it out and we'll press and fold it all together.
You got a question? How much snow and ice did you guys get?
So we got about between 3 to 4 inches of snow, probably followed by an inch or so of ice, which has been pretty devastating around here. Lots of people are without power. I heard some estimates about 250,000 people in Tennessee are without power. We are very fortunate that where we live, all of our power lines are underground, so we still have power. My parents were not as fortunate, so they're here staying with us, especially with it being so cold out there. But, we are very lucky with that. And, we've just lost a few branches and just one small tree, which happened to be my husband's favorite tree. But other than that, we've fared the storm fairly well. Okay, we've got our butter cut in here pretty good. And again, you just don't want any pieces bigger than a pea on there, just because that kind of creates a butter pocket in there, which of course isn't the worst thing on there, but you just won't get as nice of a flaky layer with it. Okay. So now we've got this. I'm just going to remove any chunks in between my blades here. There we go. And we're done with this. And now we're going to make our wet mixture. So we're going to start with our discard. We're going to use a half a cup of our sourdough discard. There we go. Pour it up. Looks like I'm ready to feed these guys up so that we can make some more bread. We're going to bake up a couple loaves tonight with our dinner. I think I'm going to do my cinnamon one, and I might just do my traditional loaf. I've got 3 in there, but I'm deciding which 2 to bake up tonight. So let's do this smaller one. Half a cup of our sourdough discard. And then we're going to add in a half a cup of pumpkin puree, which is going to be the rest of my pumpkin from earlier this week that we used. We made a pumpkin coffee cake, and so I used a cup of that, and so this is kind of the remaining pumpkin from it. And then we're going to add in a 1/4 cup of heavy cream. So I'm going to go over here. We will use a little bit of extra cream to brush over the top of our scones, but for just right now, we need a 1/4 of a cup. And we'll add that in. And then 1 egg, and then a teaspoon of vanilla. And this is kind of our wet base.
Do you have this recipe posted anywhere?
I do have this recipe card available for our members, but I do post all of my lives on the link on our page, so everybody can always rewatch this video and just bake along with me again. And I go through every single step and measurement so that you can truly recreate these recipes by watching again. So 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract in here for our wet base. And then we're going to just kind of mix this together until it's all kind of incorporated. There. So again, in here, we've got our 1/2 cup of our discard with our 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree, a 1/4 cup of cream, a teaspoon of vanilla, and 1 egg. So this is all of our wet ingredients. We'll mix it up well, and then we're going to gently mix it into our dry ingredients, which was 2½ cups of flour with a 1/2 cup of brown sugar, 2½ teaspoons of baking powder, and then we added in our spices, which was a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, a tablespoon of cinnamon, and a 1/2 teaspoon of allspice, and a 1/2 teaspoon of cloves. So lots of good stuff in there. Just making sure I've got this egg mixed up in here well. gonna grab a quick fork. Sometimes the egg likes to run away. There we go. Now, when we mix this into our big thing, you don't want to like stir it in. You just want to lightly toss it, because what we're going to do is we're going to turn it out on our counter and we'll do our press and fold into our shape. So don't just try to, like stir it in there and cream it together. You don't want it to. You want it to be a nice kind of dry shag. There we go. I'm just going to take my fork here and kind of just lightly toss it together with it. Again, I don't want to cream it together. Just make sure that flour kind of gets coated in here.
You get this question quite a bit. Why don't you use your stand mixer more?
I do use my stand mixer for certain things like cookies on there. It just depends what the recipe is. This is a recipe that you don't want to over mix or it's going to ruin it. So I like to do it by hand. Same with my muffins. I use a butter base in them, and over mixing them causes them to be dense and really stuff. But if I'm doing a recipe that I need my eggs whites fluffy too, or things, or they're cookies where I want it to be creamed together, then I use my stand mixer for it. But it really just dictates what the recipe needs. And so having a stand mixer doesn't mean you can use it for all recipes, because it really depends on what you're making and what ingredients you're using. And it might seem crazy that over mixing something can ruin your things, but it really can, especially if you use like liquid butter, like melted butter instead of oil. It can really change your things. So we're going to do our press and folds here, where we're pressing our mixture together. It looks really dry and crumbly, but that is what you want, because every time I fold this mixture over and I press it down, it's going to create a new flaky layer in our scone. So think about how biscuits and scones have those wonderful flaky layers. This is how you get it. You don't want to, again, knead it, but I'm just folding it on top of each other and pressing it down. And then once I get to where it's pretty much mixed together, then I will divide this into two kind of discs. I'll shape it into two discs, and then we'll cut it up into 8 pieces each. So 16 mini scones. It's a little bit messy, but worth it. Here we go. Kind of slide this up, get a little bit of this dry crumb, add it back on here. And kind of divide this out on here, add a little bit over here. And now what I'm going to do is kind of just press it into about a disc that's around 1 to 1.5 inches thick. And that way we can cut these into our scones. And again, if you have any crumbs, you can just kind of press and fold those back on there to get your shape. Sometimes you need to press a little bit more, but again, don't need so much as just press down to shape. And don't worry if you have like splits and cracks. When everything bakes together, they'll pop up and they will be wonderful. Okay. Those look just about right. Make sure you want them around the same height. It's okay if one is a little bit bigger than the other. Wash my hands real quick, and then we'll move these to our parchment lined baking sheet. Now I'm just going to take, this is also a pastry cutter, but it's a single one, which is a little bit different. I'm just going to slide it underneath, and then we'll place it on our parchment paper. And then we're going to cut these into each one into 8 equal portions. So I'm going to cut first kind of in half.
And what kind of scones are you making?
These are pumpkin scones, and then we're gonna make a lovely cinnamon brown sugar glaze to drizzle over the top. Let's see. So I've got my first one in, and then what I always do is so that they bake up nicely, I press them out because they grow a little bit in size, and you want them to have that nice even bake, a little bit of air between each one. Now, you don't have to cut these in the little puck shapes that I do it. You could also do squares. I just think that they're a little bit cuter when they're little triangles. And you can also just make a giant puck and then do 8 big ones if you want. I like the mini ones. It allows you to have more than one. Feels more like a treat. Stretch these out just a little bit. Again, to have that little bit of air between them as they bake, because if you keep them too close together, then those insides don't bake up as nicely on here. And then our last thing before we're going to pop these in the oven, we're going to brush these with a little bit of cream on the top, and then we'll sprinkle them with a teeny bit of brown sugar, which just gives them a little sugar crust in case you don't like to eat them with the glaze or anything on them. You don't need much cream, just a small, teeny tiny bit. So it's less than a tablespoon for all of these, but just enough to really kind of wet your basting brush and kind of dip over the top. Here. And then we'll just dabble it on here. And then we'll sprinkle a little bit of brown sugar over it. You can also use regular sugar or cinnamon sugar. All are great options for this to go on top for it. I'm using brown sugar because that's the sugar we use inside, so I have it out. But either one works for it. Here. And last little bit.
Do you have a question? Would a carrot cake scone work?
Yes, you can definitely make a carrot cake scone. You can make a scone pretty with any flavor. You just kind of have to work with it. I've made banana bread scones before. I have made a carrot cake scone before. Haven't done it in a long time, and I love carrot cake. It's one of my favorite desserts on there. But you could do like a cream cheese like glaze on the top. But you just kind of make the similar flavors. Your mix-ins would be the same, but you just have your ratios right here. We're sprinkling a little bit of our brown sugar on the top of each one of these scones, just enough to give it a little bit of extra sweetness because, as you know, scones are not terribly sweet. This whole recipe only has a half a cup of brown sugar in it. Now, the glaze that we make on top adds the perfect level of sweetness. I mean, it just brings them over. But scones just in themselves are not an overly sweet dish, but they have a little bit. I always like to say they're like your mix between a cookie and a biscuit because you've got some of those qualities from both. Our oven is preheated to 400 degrees. Make sure it's nice and hot when you pop it in. And then we're going to pop it in here and we're going to bake it for 18 minutes at 400 degrees. So I'll set my timer for 18 minutes. And while that's cooking, we'll get our chicken cooked up, our pasta made, and we'll make our glaze up. I'm going to give my hands a quick rinse from that brown sugar. Okay. Let's get our water boiling and then we can drop our noodles in once we get to a good boil. But let's start by getting our chicken seasoned and seared off in our pan, and then we'll make our pasta in our sauce kind of inside there. So I've got 4 chicken breasts here. We're going to fillet these off in half so that they cook up a little bit faster for it. And then we'll season them with some Italian spices, garlic salt, a little bit of Worcestershire, which will help keep them nice and juicy. But be a nice kind of simple lunch for it. I was trying to figure out what to have. My kids just always love pasta, and I found, it was just so fitting. I found this snowflake pasta, and I was like, oh, we've got to have this during our snow day. And so it's like cute. It's a bunch of different snowflakes. So it'd be very cute. be very fitting, although we have, I feel like, more ice than snow. The kids are like sitting out there, and I said, right now it is just, it may look like snow, but it is just a solid sheet of ice out there. It is not fun to play in because it is rock hard. There we go. Okay. I'm gonna we can get our pan, our oil heating up in our pan. That way it will be nice and hot when we can drop these on in just a second. I'm gonna put a good amount on here because this is a pretty good sized pan. This is a 6-quart saute pan. So I want enough to kind of get a nice covering on it. We'll heat it up. But for our chicken, we're gonna do some Worcestershire sauce on here. This is it has a nice, it's a vinegar base, but it has a nice acidity to it, which helps break down the chicken and keeps it really juicy. We're going to use some Italian seasoning, a good amount. Some onion powder, which will give it a nice kind of savory flavor. And there we go. I'm going to add some more oregano because I love oregano, and then some garlic salt. Then we're going to flip this over and do kind of the same thing on the other side. We're going to season it up well because some of these spices will drip off into our pan, which will be really great for our sauce. So making sure you're using a lot. It's not like it's going to go to waste because those will actually be added into the sauce and they'll kind of have a chance to caramelize up on the pan. So give this a nice little pat around, and then we're going to just flip them over. Kind of coat them all up. Make sure everyone gets, there we go, on here. And before we season up this next side, we'll let that boil for a little bit. We'll add some salt to it just a second. We're going to season this next side up too. So onion powder on it. And we'll do our Worcestershire, a little drizzle of our Worcestershire. There we go. Again, you're going to cook it off. You won't do it, but it adds so much juiciness to your meat. It just makes it wonderful. We're going to do our Italian seasoning here. And don't skimp on it, a good amount, because again, this will also add to our sauce, but it will really make sure the chicken is delicious. Some extra oregano. And a little bit of garlic salt.
You have a question. What's in the Italian seasoning?
So the Italian seasoning, most of the time, it's just your classic basil, oregano, thyme, rosemary, and savory. I'd see, and they have sage in this one, so, and marjoram. So a lot of times, it's typically you have your basic 5, and then a couple brands will throw in an extra one on it. So you can always make it using, if you have the individual herbs at home. So you don't have to necessarily run out and grab it, but there's typically your basic 5 of oregano, basil, rosemary, sage, and thyme, or savory. But you can add those in there. You can always add more in there. It's just your kind of classic ones that they find in the basic Italian cuisine. Adding a little bit of salt to our water because we're going to use some of that in our pasta sauce. Checking our heat. These are my little snowflake noodles that I was talking about, called Snowfall, but they're cute on here. So they're very cute. We're going to add these in here. We'll cook them up. I'll just do the whole box because it's not a very big box. It's not a full pound. And we're going to give these a quick toss. Let me grab my regular spoon. Should work fine. And then we'll let those cook up. And before they're done, we'll reserve some of that pasta water for our sauce. Our oil should be nice and hot, so I should be able to drop in our first sets of our chicken. There we go. You can see we've got a nice little sizzle on here. And I'm going to do 4 at a time because I don't think I can get all 8 in here. And that way they'll cook up and then we'll take them out and then we'll make our sauce in here while we cook the other 8 off in there, or the other 4. But while we're waiting for those, we can prep up our veggies to go into our sauce. There we go. And we got to make our little thing. Let me give my hands a quick rinse. So we're going to do a very, very simple kind of sauce here. It's just going to be a mixture. We're going to have some fresh garlic, some diced up fresh tomatoes and spinach, and then our little pasta stock, maybe a little chicken bouillon and some Parmesan cheese and a little bit of cream. Really, really simple. And then we'll tuck our chicken back into it afterwards. So it kind of hydrates it back up and is just delicious. And then I'm going to make my noodles are going to be just, I'm going to keep them separate so that we'll have just some kind of creamy, buttered noodles on the side, and then they can put the sauce and the chicken over it. That way, for those who want them separate, they can have it. For those who want them together, they can have it together. But we're going to use a good amount of garlic in here. I think this is because that is kind of going to be the nice star. This is going to have a really good garlic pop in our sauce.
About what temp do you cook the chicken?
So I have these cooking over about a 7 before it. So I heated it up. I want them at a pretty high saute. I'm not doing them quite as high as like an 8, but I'm doing them fairly high because I want them to get a really nice sear on them as they cook through and get a really good kind of brownish saute mark on it. But they're a little bit thicker, so I want them to cook a little bit longer. If they were slightly thinner, I could do a little bit higher and cook faster, but these were pretty big chicken breast cutlets, so doing a little bit lower so they take a bit longer but won't overcook on them. So let's get our garlic minced up here. And then I'm going to give my pasta a little bit of a stir. And then I will say this fresh garlic, we'll saute it. Once we're done and remove the chicken, we're going to use these drippings in our for our pasta sauce. Is going to add great flavor. There we go. So give this a nice stir on it. And I'm starting to see my chicken get that kind of nice little ring around the side. So I'm knowing that it's about time to flip. I like to rotate my pan because I have learned through time that my hottest part of my burner is actually up here. So I constantly am rotating my pan so that they all get even heat on it. I feel like once you've been in your kitchen for a while, you tend to know exactly how your oven or your stove cooks. And once you know those little things, things start to turn out more perfect every single time. That's why I always say, I always give time frames. Don't always, when recipes say for this amount of time frame, I'm like, but everybody's oven cooks a little bit different, especially if you're using gas or if you're using electric. It's all a little bit different. So do it until you know that it's right and it's comfortable. And that's when you'll get like the good understanding, when some recipes say this and it takes a lot longer or a lot less. Okay. There we go. We got our nice little saute on it. Beautiful. I'm going to get another plate out for when these are ready. We'll transfer them on. And I'll get some new tongs for that. Okay, let's get our tomatoes here. Pull off our stalk. We're just going to dice these up. You could also, if you don't have fresh tomatoes, you could always use a can of diced tomatoes as well. Just take out that little bit of core right there. And when we'll add this in after we've sauteed up our garlic and our spinach, because the tomatoes will add a little bit of liquid to it. And that will kind of make a nice, fresh, lighter sauce to it. But we don't want to add them in right away because then it will kind of prevent it from forming up nicely. So there's one. And Cut these down. Let me take out that little nub. And just a smaller dice. That way you don't have really, you're not keeping your tomato skins very, very large. You could always take the time to peel off your tomato skins, but I find as long as you dice them up smaller, they don't bother me in the cooking.
If you were using a can of tomatoes, would you drain it?
Actually, I would keep the liquid in there because it would add a nice bit of juiciness to the sauce or to the sauce part for it. So I would keep it in there for it. Okay, let's see. I'm going to check these noodles and see if they're ready. I still think they're pretty firm yet. Not yet. Still needs a little bit longer. While we are waiting for the chicken to kind of cook off there, I'm going to get our butter melting for our glaze, for our brown sugar glaze. There we go. Now let me grab a little bit of butter. So I'm going to melt 2 tablespoons of butter. And then I'm going to, once it's melted, we'll remove it from heat and we'll add 2 tablespoons of brown sugar to it. But don't add your brown sugar in until like right after you remove it from the heat because you don't want it to essentially caramelize or turn into a candy in there or it won't form into your glaze very well. Okay, these are just about done. Let them saute for just about another minute, but I can tell by their firmness on there. But see now, like I talked about how we have these lovely little drippings, these are going to add a lot of great flavor to our sauce, which is going to be, that's what you like. Those, so don't feel like you're wasting all of your spices, your sauteing. They're going into the pan, they're caramelizing onto the bottom of the pan. But when we add our tomatoes and our starchy water, that's going to add extra richness and flavor to the sauce. They're not burning, but they're actually like caramelizing on the bottom of your pan. And we will deglaze them, which will make them wonderful. Okay. These are just about. Okay. Take our chicken off and we'll get our next set on. Looking good. Okay. And we're adding on our last round. Again, this was just 4 chicken breasts that we filleted in half, which means it's going to cook up much faster than if we were to leave them whole, which will allow them to stay nice and juicy and tender. A lot of times when you leave your chicken whole, you have to cook it a lot longer, and then it kind of lets out those juices. It gets a little overcooked on the outside. It's not as nice. Filleting it through allows you to cook it faster, seals in those moisture, that flavor, makes it a lot nicer.
Do you use soy sauce to tenderize the chicken?
I did not use soy sauce. I used Worcestershire sauce. So Worcestershire sauce is like a vinegar-based thing. So the vinegar is the like acid in it that's going to help break it apart, similar to how a lemon juice breaks down the chicken fat and everything like that. It's going to keep your chicken nice and tender and very, very delicious and moist. Give my butter a quick swirl here.
Are you still making beef bourguignon?
Yes, that is my plan is for beef bourguignon. We'll bake up some sourdough. And then we've got our French box that we're going to do. My kids have already peeked out what was in it on there. We did our little German box last night, and what I thought was going to be such a hit, there were some ones that I was like, this looked like it was going to be so much better than it was.
Could you use a balsamic vinegar to tenderize the chicken?
You could use it, definitely. It would give you a slightly different flavor on it for it. So I use the Worcestershire, which has different flavors in it. Balsamic is a little bit more tart on it than Worcestershire. Worcestershire has some other ingredients that makes it a little bit more savory, which I like over that. But I've definitely done, I've done a vinaigrette for marinating like chicken, like Italian vinaigrette. I've done a balsamic glaze on it to marinate. So you can, but you would want to use less, and you probably want to mix it with a little bit of an oil to kind of cut through that stronger acidity flavor. Okay, we've got our butter melted here. for our brown sugar glaze. We're going to add in 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, and we're going to let that kind of dissolve into the butter, and then we'll add in cream and powdered sugar, a little bit of cinnamon to make our glaze. Let me grab a little spoon here. But you want to add the brown sugar in while the butter is still nice and hot, but you don't want it on that heat source because this is going to help dissolve that brown sugar, but you don't want it to turn into a caramel. So we'll let that sit there, kind of come into it. There we go.
And what is that glaze for?
This is going to go on top of our scones that are baking in the oven. There we go. Get our chicken flipped over. Beautiful. Okay. We'll be done with that one. And our pasta here is just about done. So I'm going to grab a little thing and we're going to reserve some of this liquid for our pasta sauce. So I'm just going to ladle it out. And I'm going to take about, I'm going to say I'll probably reserve 1.5 cups. I might not use all of it, but I always want to make sure I have more than enough. And you can see that starchy water is going to help give us a nice velvety texture to our sauce so we don't have to add as much liquid to it as there. We're going to drain.
What are you cooking the chicken at?
The cooking, I'm cooking it in some olive oil. We've seasoned off with a lot of spices, which will be nice and caramelized on the bottom of our pan. So when we deglaze it, those will add some great flavors. There we go. Gonna let this, and then I'm gonna shake it out. We're gonna put them right back in here because I'm gonna make kind of a buttered noodle in here for this. But I'm gonna set it to the side. Let's go grab our scones out of the oven. And then our chicken should be ready to come off, and we can make our sauce, which will come together fairly quickly. They look fabulous and smell wonderful. Look at our beautiful scones. You can see those layers as they puffed up. They've just are massive and wonderful. That's the press and folds. They give you those flaky, wonderful layers, which are just amazing in here. So just look at these right here. You can see just those flaky layers on there and how big they've puffed up and are just so delicious on there. That's what makes the puff scones just amazing. And it's just the press and folds from making it and pressing and folding over and over and not kneading your dough. That's what really gives your scones that wonderful, light, but delicious texture, just like in a biscuit. Okay, we've got our chicken here. I'm going to turn this down nice and low. We'll add our last bits of our chicken off here. And now we're going to add into our pan here. We're going to add in our garlic and let that saute for a little bit. Don't worry again, your spices are not burned on there. Again, this is kind of what you want. That is going to lift up and will flavor our sauce. We're going to caramelize our garlic here in that residual oil and those bits. You can kind of scrape at the bottom as you go, but when we add in our liquid, that will add in a lot of flavor. We're going to let that heat up for just a second. While we wait, let's add in for our buttered noodles. We're keeping it really, really simple. Again, this is like my kids' favorite way to do just a nip noodles. I'm going to put in about 2 or so tablespoons of butter in here. We're just going to mix them up. We'll add a little bit of cream and garlic salt and then a little bit of Parmesan cheese. And that's kind of just going to keep it separate. So they'll have a little bit of flavor on their own. And so some of my kids will eat them and then they'll pull out the chicken and some will dump the sauce from here on top. So it gives the options of both. A lot of times I'll mix them together, but I'm keeping it separate today because Evie was like, can we have them separate so I can have just my buttered noodles on their own? And I was like, we can do that. Let's get a spoon here. So I've got my starchy water. We're going to add in a little bit of chicken bouillon to our starchy water. This is going to add some great flavor to our pasta sauce. And it's nice and hot, so it's going to dissolve, which will be lovely. So let that sit there for a second.
And do you post your recipes?
We upload our link on our page to all of our lives. We upload them so everybody has them. And you can always watch and recreate our recipes. I'm going to add in my tomatoes here. When we add the tomatoes in, they are going to start to lift up our bits on the bottom, just like that. And then when we add a little bit of our glaze, that will lift up a little bit more of our liquid. But you see how it's slowly deglazing.
No onions for this recipe?
No onions for this recipe. I kept it simple on here because I'm running low on onions and I want to save them for some of my other recipes, and the garlic is going to be just great, but you could always add in if you wanted to. So we've got in here, we're going to slowly lift those up, kind of move that along. We're going to let this simmer here. I'm going to add a splash of cream into our butter here, and then we're going to turn on our heat for our noodles. There we go. I don't put too much, just enough to kind of slightly coat them. It's not in a super thick sauce, but just enough to have a little bit on there, and then a little bit of garlic salt. I'm going to add in a little bit of our liquid here. Again, make sure you deglaze the bottom of your pan as you're going. Bring up all of those lovely spices. Let them simmer with our tomatoes. We'll get our garlic salt over our noodles here. A good shake. We've got our little snowflakes here. There we go. And then I'm just keeping it nice and low to kind of evaporate some of that liquid off of the cream. Let's make our glaze now for our things while our pasta is simmering there. And let's real quick, we'll add in some of our spinach so that can simmer, and then we can make our glaze. So we'll add in a little bit. Kind of let it tuck in. We're going to add in a little bit more of our liquid. And we'll let it simmer here. And then we'll taste it in just a second. But I've got my brown sugar and my butter here. We're going to add in about 2 tablespoons of heavy cream in here, just kind of matching what we have in the butter and the brown sugar. I'm going to give it a mix, and then we're going to pour it in the bowl so that we can add in our other ingredients. The cream helps the sugar or the brown sugar dissolve a little bit as well, so it's not as reliant on just the butter to get there. But we'll mix it in while that pan is still hot. I want to make sure I get it all in here. But it gives you just those wonderful flavors from the brown sugar and that butter, which gives you just a really different flavor than a typical like glaze. It's a much richer and hearty glaze. We're going to add in a little bit of our cinnamon, which will give us a slightly darker color as well, and a nice pop of flavor. That lid was not on. I almost could have put a whole jar in there. We want about a half a teaspoon or so. I'm going to get my little whisk here. We'll whisk it in. And then we're going to add in our powdered sugar until we have the consistency similar to glue that we can kind of drizzle over our scones. And once our scones should be just about ready, you don't want to drizzle it over when they're piping hot, but when they're still nice and warm, so it kind of oozes, but not so hot that it runs right off. Start with your powdered sugar a little bit at a time because this is a butter and cream based glaze. It's going to take a lot less sugar, powdered sugar in it than if it was a pure liquid base, like a juice base or a water base. It's much thicker.
Brenda and Sue sent you.
Well, thank you, Brenda and Sue. We appreciate that a lot. Add in a little bit more. And then we'll just take a quick pause. We'll let that sit for a second. And let's give our pasta over here a quick toss. I'm going to grab my spoon here. I'm going to taste my sauce. Delicious. There we go. Tuck those in there.
Can you go over everything that's in there?
Yes, so we first sauteed off our chicken breasts that we seasoned up with Italian seasoning, a little Worcestershire, onion powder, oregano in there. And then we added, after we removed them, we cooked up our garlic and the drippings. Then we added in fresh diced tomatoes, spinach, and then our starchy water from our pasta with a little bit of chicken bouillon in here. So it has some really great flavors from those, like the chicken in there, but it's just lovely and delicious. Okay. Add this in. Well, we're almost actually, I think we are good. I don't think I need to add any more actually. Look, it's perfect. So I'll pull that around. Okay, and I think our pasta sauce here is just about done. We're going to top it off with a little bit of cream. That will, don't need much. You could always keep it plain if you want, but I love the smoothness that just about a tablespoon will add. And don't add too much, just a little bit. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our chicken here and you're going to soak it back in here so it soaks up all of this wonderful flavor of this. So you have them sauteed off with those spices on it, but now it's in this beautiful, sauce that then we can spoon over our snowflake pasta. Got a little bit of festivities here.
And would mushrooms work with the sauce?
You could definitely do mushrooms. I actually was thinking about doing mushrooms, but I want to keep my mushrooms for another dish that I'm planning on making here. And then any of this little meat drippings that you have left over, just pop that back in here because again, those will add great flavor to the dish as well. So we've got that in here. And we're going to turn this down nice and low. We'll drizzle our scones and then we'll be ready to serve up here. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of Parmesan cheese over the top of this so that it can kind of make a nice little melted layer on. Add just a little pop of every, not too much, but just a little bit extra. And now let's drizzle up our scones with our beautiful glaze. So this is our brown sugar and kind of cinnamon and butter glaze. The nice thing about this glaze is it is not super heavy, but it has got a great rich flavor to it for it. We'll give a nice little drizzle on it and kind of dab it over there for it. Now, if you wanted to, you could always, so sometimes I'll like to take a scone, look at those beautiful layers, and if you like the more coated topping, you could dip it in like that to give you a nice kind of really pretty on there. Or if you want to take the time to pipe out your, put it in a little piping bag and drizzle over the top, you could. But all kind of work really well with it. Now you want your scones to be a little bit warm so that when it heats up, it kind of melts over it and kind of thins out a little, but leaves you with a really, really rich kind of base for it. Look at that. We're just going to dip them because it's easier. It wants to cooperate a little bit better there. And I will say this glaze is so delicious because it has that just that wonderful brown sugar and butter flavor to it, but it's not super heavy because you can it's lighter and so delicious. There we go. This is the one that Teddy always is like, where's the bowl? I want to lick the bowl. Okay. Well, guys, I think we are ready to serve up our lunch today. Let me just slide this out of the way, and I'm going to have some very happy kiddos. Let's grab this. And I'll grab my plate. And we will be ready to serve. Turn that off. And we'll bring this a little bit closer so we can marvel at our delicious scones.
Yeah, you always make such a big lunch.
You know what? My kids are all home. My parents are here because they're out of power. So we have a lot of mouths to feed and we've been kind of around doing stuff. So I typically make 2 bigger meals a day when everybody's home, either a breakfast and a dinner or a lunch and a dinner. So this kind of stops the snacking all day when everybody is home. So, and when you spread it out over 9 people, they're more smaller portions, but filling. Okay, let's start up with our snowflake pasta here, because on a snow day, you need your little snowflakes here. Add one little dot there. We kind of coated those with a butter, cream, and a little bit of garlic salt. And then we're going to serve those up with our chicken breast in our delicious tomato kind of pasta sauce here. And we'll drizzle that over the top and it will have just this nice kind of hearty flavor. Has those Italian seasonings, oregano, garlic is the show on there. And that sauce is made from those drippings and the starchy water of the pasta. So it's not a super heavy, but it's very robust and full of flavor. And then for a sweet little treat at the end, we've got our pumpkin scones with our brown sugar glaze on the top. Those are made with our sourdough discard. They have a half a cup of pumpkin in it and that wonderful glaze on top for a little extra bit of sweetness. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of our recipes at home, you can just go to our page and search for what we made. So our snowflake pasta with our chicken and tomato and spinach sauce. And you can always watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my all-clad pans in there, my bakeware, knives, and cutting boards, all the different things that I use in the kitchen. I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.